This is Lee Forrester. Time for another episode of Metal on Metal. Today we'll be talking about a new tactical combat series game that is up for pre-order currently, Goose Green. No, that's not a World War II battle. That is indeed from the Falklands conflict, one of the most important land battles of that campaign. You've got it now in TCS form, coming out soon. This is quite a bit different than other TCS games, which often feature a mix of armor and infantry, and sometimes get rather large in scale. Black Wednesday has a few infantry divisions battling each other. GD41, you've even got Corps involved. In this one, we have simply one largish battalion against another largish battalion, yet you have an entire map for maneuver. So there's a lot of ground to cover. The game itself is just one day. So it's quite playable. You can play the entire campaign in a day easily, which I cannot say for many TCS titles. In this one, op sheets, that TCS form of needing to plan your actions, your maneuvers, are very important, but you'll really only be writing up one op sheet at the beginning of the game. The British might need to change to a second one throughout the day, but there's simply not enough time for lots of fancy maneuvering, so your planning will matter quite a bit and shape how the battle unfolds. The game has a mix of supporting arms other than armor, and to me, just enough, one or two of everything. There's one artillery formation for each side. The British have one mortar. The Argentines have one recoilless rifle unit. So you've got a little bit of flavor, but it's not overwhelming at all. Here is a large overview of the map. The British begin here in the north and over on this coast, coming in, attacking down the peninsula all the way to get to Goose Green at the end. If you've played a TCS game before, you can see that's kind of a lot of ground to cover in a day that isn't actually that long. You've got nighttime at the beginning of the game, twilight near the end, and an entire battalion of Argentines resisting the advance. A quick look at the terrain reveals nothing that crazy. You've got an airstrip, you've got tracks, which the British can't actually use because they didn't know where they were. That's only to help the Argentine redeploy a little more quickly. You do have rivers, the gully, which if you've read about the battle, you know about that there. There is a gorse line that goes across the center of the map. I can show you here quick. It's right around there. So that's a feature that features a little bit in the game, but it's not overwhelming. Mostly it's going to be clear and open. Spotting isn't great because it was kind of soupy ground, and also none of it is billiard table because the ground was pretty wet, which prevented a lot of mortars and other rounds from doing a whole lot of damage. Artillery wasn't as effective for that reason. So you'll find casualties are here, but they're a little lower than in some TCS games. The weather is important. That's the variable, not so much the terrain. Mist cuts down visibility, wind cuts down effectiveness of artillery, and rain does both at the same time. That will be rolled for, changes every hour, which represents what happened during the battle. Now we look at the entire counter sheet for units for the entire game. It's about a quarter of a sheet, a half of one of the sides. The Argentines are up here at the top. Their firepower is okay. It goes between 4 and 6 for the infantry. The morale value is what's going to hurt the Argentines, and that's between 4 and 5. This means that once their battalion morale starts piling up, and it will, they're not going to be the most effective troops. They're going to often be suppressed under fire, and the British will have a clear advantage, not just in terms of their actual firepower numbers, but in the effect of the firepower on degrading the enemy capabilities. They do have a couple nice heavy machine guns and a few mortars. They actually have a 120 millimeter mortar that was virtually useless in combat. This one you have to roll a 6 to even use it because I think it was the barrel was stuck and couldn't be elevated, and they had to maneuver it around to shoot it that way. So there's a lot of little chrome like this in the game. Also, you have some Argentine anti-aircraft guns which were deployed around the airstrip. Those have no role in the beginning of the game, but a pretty important role near the end as the British are trying to approach Goose Green and do that via the airstrip. There are random packets of both British and Argentine air power that appear. For the British side, you see they did bring a Milan unit, which they used. There weren't any tanks to destroy with them, but they did use it effectively against dug-in troops in trenches. A blowpipe unit to provide better anti-aircraft capability, And there are some optional vehicles. These were not in the actual battle, but they could have been. They considered bringing them with, decided not to because the ground was so wet. But in hindsight, they might have done just fine. So you can try that out as an optional rule in the game if you like. The game covers one day, and it begins during night when the British do pretty well. They maneuver very quickly, and for that reason, you'll see that night turns are half hour rather than full hour because the British were much more effective with night vision, etc., etc., etc. Reinforcement groups for the Argentines can be rolled for and sometimes appear during the day. And the game ends at nightfall, right before nightfall, when in the actual situation, the troops sat down, they were exhausted, and then they didn't negotiate a surrender eventually. So you have one day to see, as the British, how far can you get? Can you get to that point or even further by taking Goose Green, or maybe not that far? There are not too many special rules. The British had no ammo to speak of. They did have to carry some in, but they didn't have any trucks or helicopters dropping them to the battlefield. So the British have a limited number of shots with their Milan, and I think they're limited to 5 mortar shots in the campaign game. So the mortar will not be nearly as important for the British as they were in standard TCS games. Like I mentioned before, there are random packets of air support that are rolled for hourly. And there are some special rules for the British commander, Colonel H, who was someone who led from the front and ended up actually being mortally wounded in the battle as he assaulted, apparently by himself, an Argentine position as he was frustrated in trying to get the assault going against Darwin Hill. So there are rules if Colonel H dies in this game, what happens to the command structure, etc. Here are a look at the scenarios. There is, of course, the entire battle, which is the main one, and I assume will be what most players will be dealing with. It's also broken into the 3 actual engagements, I guess, that comprise the whole attack of the day. The first was the initial assault. You can see this is early in the morning. The British are coming from these positions here, and I've just deployed them so you can see what they are. At this point, you've got the entire British force. You've got a company here and roughly 3 companies up here with a mortar and the Milan, which isn't useful at first, with some supporting fires from machine guns on this hilltop overlooking Burnside Hill. The British are trying to move down here as quickly as possible, and the Argentines are trying to slow them down. And there is a free deployment situation where the Argentines can decide, do they want to deploy more strength to the hill? Do they want to try to protect us better? Withdraw them both? Do the mix, which is more like the historical opening? You have those choices already as the Argentine player in terms of how you want to begin. And it's important for the British to get south as fast as possible, because the first and perhaps only credible defensive position outside of Goose Green is the hill, just Darwin Hill, just to the south here. There are trenches there. So in a way, it's a bit of a race to see if the Argentines can get into position in the trenches and bring up some reinforcements from the south to strengthen that position, and perhaps even get them all dug in, rolling forward on an op sheet before the Commonwealth, before the British arrive. So if the British are slowed down a lot, the odds go up that the Argentines will do that, and that can make it a long day for the British. Here's a closer look at the initial units that began in the north, the battalion minus the company that's over there to the east. The Milan unit, as I mentioned, the blowpipe, and this is the command section that's involved in the Colonel H rules I mentioned before. Here is a closer look at the beginning Argentine units, where they can be deployed in these 3 areas. That's your choice, which of those areas you put them in. So the second phase of the battle, after that initially opening, the Argentines withdraw to the south, bring up some reinforcements from the south, and now the British are set up to try to attack Darwin Hill. Trench line here. This is, if you've read about the battle, this is one of the main parts you'll read. The dramatic assault through the gully, the Gorse Gully, etc. It's all right here. A clever Argentine player may consider, if you're playing the full day battle, deploying a platoon here to keep the British from flanking like they actually did in reality. Even though there's not much here, this is actually a pretty tough position in play experiences, you'll find. This bridge was not apparently used in the battle. However, it's possible it might have still been operational. It was sort of a wooden bridge to go across here. So there is a rule that you can roll, I think, a 1 or 2 on a die 6, and in that case, as the bridge is operational. That could really unhinge this sort of defense. So the clever Argentine might want to deploy something in Darwin Settlement to prevent that from happening. And here is the third part. After Darwin Hill was successfully taken, that's that battle up there we just talked about. In this scenario, you see the British start with a number of casualties already. And now, in the afternoon into the beginning, or just into the late afternoon, they have to make it all the way to Goose Green and actually try to take it over. It should look daunting because it is daunting. Here you've got an Argentine company, you've got all the anti-aircraft guns here, nearly a company right there, and these are pretty beat-up forces that begin in Goose Green, plus there were some pretty low-quality garrisons there. Still, they don't just evaporate on contact. You actually have to fight your way into there. And in our playtesting experience, it is rare that the British actually get into Goose Green. It's a great goal to set, but as the day goes on, you run out of time and you run out of troops. In addition, if the British take too many casualties, if you actually lose a platoon, it costs you victory points. So you can't just throw everybody away into the battle. You have to keep an eye on your casualties as well. And that makes it a pretty tight decision making in terms of how hard do you push. These anti-aircraft guns overlook all the stuff on this terrain pretty well, so the Brits will often want to come in through this way to stay out of the cover of that. But at some point, here, or there, you're going to make contact. And you have to fight your way through that contact in good shape and also with a credible enough force to go into Goose Green, where, by the way, you're not allowed to fire artillery or mortars because there were British civilians in this area, and the British needed to keep those casualties to an absolute minimum and preferably to 0. So, overall, what's my feeling about this? Of course, I'm going to say it's great, but I've really enjoyed playtesting this. I felt like I got a nice understanding of the battle from playing this game. And I've not played any other games on this topic to compare them to, but I honestly can't see how could you do it better than with the TCS. Perfect size for a nice TCS game. The British have a lot going on, lots to play with, lots to do, but they're under extreme time pressure. And this is where, if you like being sneaky and irritating, then you can be a good Argentine player as you drop down your endless supply of low quality but still present artillery against the British, hoping for that 66 that will inflict some serious casualties and make the British really ease up on the pressure. You can also use your Argentine op sheets carefully to put your guys just in the right spot to thwart the Commonwealth offensive. So in the sense, you're never going to drive the British off the map or anything like that. It's not a meeting engagement, but you can make them lose. So, and that's your job as the Argentine. I think there are lots of little dramas that replay, specific assaults that'll be memorable because they set the tone for the entire game. And I think that gives it a lot of narrative value. So to me, this is a great intro into the TCS. You've got a good, quick overview. You don't have too many units to mess with. You get to play with all the features of the TCS rules in a way where, as I mentioned before, little things can make a big difference. But it's not like you're ever only going to play this one time in your life. I mean, that's possible, but to me, some of the bigger TCS games, once you've played Omaha, are you going to do it again? Really, it's such a big undertaking. This one you could pull out every now and then and try it again, learning from the lessons you had from the last game. That's what I have to say. At its current price, I think it's $24 is a Ziploc. You would be foolish not to get this soon-to-be classic TCS game. Go pre-order it now.